Hello there. I just want to look at a very small section of Rachel Aviv's article in the New Yorker. It's the bit I've got to now. And it's a small section. I think there's a lot in it. I'm not sure I can get everything I want out of it in this video, and I probably will come back to it as I think about it more. I think there's points being made here which I've not really heard discussed, and not really even discussed the potential range of ramifications in the article about what is said here. I know there are limitations, otherwise it'd end up being a book, wouldn't it? And not an article. But the beauty of the article is that it puts these points out here, and there's new information here because Rachel Aviv has had access to some of the main players from the prosecution's side, and they've started talking more than they were before, certainly more than they were in their post-trial interviews. People like Evans and Breary and Jayaram in particular, those three in particular, but a few others like Susan Gilby's given away some things already. Before I look at this little bit or go through it, in the last video I mentioned Roy Meadow, Professor Roy Meadow. He was the person related to the injustice, the miscarriage of justice with Sally Clark, and I think at least two other women who were wrongly and falsely charged of murder of their own children. The reason I'm raising his name again is that, and I may have said this in previous videos, as it's a known fact, is that when Roy Meadow was shown to be an absolute dangerous charlatan that has caused enormous harm to people and effectively ended Sally Clark's life effectively, because she didn't last after she finally got out of prison on appeal. She didn't last more than about 6 months or so. She was destroyed by this man Meadow, a paediatrician and another court expert, so-called expert. But when it was decided that it would be a very good idea to remove his license to practice, this Meadow character, a letter was got up, a letter of support, supported by hundreds of his colleagues, other doctors, of course, obviously not his victims, but other doctors, and included in that list was our very own Ravi Jayaram, who signed that letter in support of Meadow. His registration was taken away initially, and then he appealed it, and it was given back to him outrageously. I read it through on Wikipedia this morning, the timeline of events, and then he gave it up voluntarily in the end. He's an abysmal character, as Dowie Evans is. If Dowie Evans, certainly matches him, if not even worse. So that's the kind of people that are supported in this kind of in-group preference of doctors. That's who they support. So going back to the last video again, where you've got Susan Gilby taken over from Tony Chambers. She's a doctor. She sees all these doctors and consultants being criticised by the management. She goes straight to them. She hugs them to her and says, "Well, I'm on your side," and is quoted, if we're to believe her own quote from this article by Rachel Aviv, as saying, "Well, I'm surprised at one of the former management saying that was concerned about whether they got the right person, or whether there were any crimes." Both Tony Chambers and the other guy, Mr. Harvey, were expressing doubts at the time, and she was saying, "Well, don't you realise what she's done?" That's Susan Gilby, back in 2018, before there were any charges. So she'd made her mind up straight away. So that's the mindset. Just to go back to the GMC, that it's the kind of organisation that, as we heard in the interview with Mark McDonald, KC, recently, in which he gave an example of why people don't come forward to speak for the defence. And he gave an example of a doctor, a female doctor, who was working at John Radcliffe in Oxford, who gave honourable and good support to the defence for somebody who's been falsely accused, and they won the trial in the end. But this doctor was had a licence stripped from her by the GMC as a kind of punishment for that, for sticking up for the truth, for being honourable. As Mark McDonald goes on to say in that interview, she appeals it, she gets the licence back, but she's not practised since, because they've destroyed her. They've destroyed her sense of, well, why would you want to be part of that kind of organisation even, when it can do that? So that's the kind of mindset we're talking about. Anyway, I was going to read this short bit now from Rachel Aviv's article, from where I left it off. Dowie Evans, the retired paediatrician, told me that he had picked which medical episodes rose to the level of, quote, suspicious events, close quote. When I asked what his criteria were, he said, quote, unexpected, precipitous, anything that is out of the usual, something with which you are not familiar, close quote. For one baby, the distinction between suspicious and not suspicious largely came down to how to define projectile vomiting. That's Rachel Aviv saying that sentence. Lucy Letby's defence team said it had found at least 2 other incidents that seemed to meet the same criteria of suspiciousness as the 24 on the diagram. That's that chart that they produced of all the alleged suspicious, well, more than suspicious, that they've stated it's deliberate harm, haven't they? That's how it got to court, that's how it got to a charge. But they happened when Lucy Letby wasn't on duty, those other 2 that the defence team saw. So they got similar criteria, defence finds similar cases, as it were, or similar situations, but she's not on duty. So clearly they weren't picked, were they? They weren't picked. Well, they didn't end up on the final list. That's all I'll say. Maybe they were picked, but they had to lose them because Lucy Letby wasn't on duty. We don't know. We'll never know that side of it because it's so shrouded in all the dark dealings that happen between Evans, the police, and those consultants. And you might, in the end, sort of say Evans Police and the Trust. That's what it becomes in the end. Once they're on board with Gilby, then it becomes not just the consultants, it's the Trust, the police, and Evans, and then Bowen down the line to rubber stamp Evans, and then the other experts to rubber stamp them as well, so-called experts in the trial. But they happened when Lucy Letby was not on duty. Evans identified events that may have been left out too. This is the bit that's really, I've got to think a lot about this. I don't think it's really been unpacked in terms of on Twitter or in any other way, I don't think. The possible range of ramifications of this. I'm going to have to revisit it, I'm sure, after this video. He told me, that's Evans telling Rachel Aviv, that after Letby's first arrest, so that's 2018, July 2018, isn't it? He was given another batch of medical records to review, and that he had notified the police of 25 more cases that he thought the police should investigate. Well, why would he think they need to investigate? I'll read it all the way through and I'll start picking it apart. I won't start jumping in. So they've given him another batch. He was given one. Then he notifies the police of 25 more cases that he thought the police should investigate. That's on top of the 24 he's already chosen from the first batch. He didn't know if Letby, or Lucy Letby, was present for them, didn't he? Well, and they didn't end up being on the diagram either. If some of these 27, so that's the 2 that the defence say they found the similar criteria, but why aren't they then deemed as suspicious events? They're kind of magicked away, aren't they? Were they chosen, and then the police said, oh, well, no, not these two, Evans, not these two, Dowie, mate, no, not these, because you're not on duty, you can't do those, can we? Oh, wait, right, sorry, I made a mistake. And they didn't end up being on the diagram. So, but if some of these 27 cases, Rachel Aviv's writing, had been represented, the rows of X's under Lucy Letby's name might have been much less compelling. Well, yeah, may well have been. In all likelihood, would have been. There's no explicit acknowledgement here. I'll go to the last sentence and I'll come back to that. In brackets after that, so the chart would have been less compelling if it showed that some of those 27 Lucy wasn't on duty for them. So in the brackets here, and then I'll stop. The Cheshire Police and the prosecution did not respond to a request for comment. No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't. Citing the court order. Yeah, that's right. To begin to look at this now, I need to get another document out. I might have to pause it for a minute, because in point 22 of the appeal rejection by the Court of Appeal that was produced recently after the recent retrial, point 22 discusses these initial 33 cases. But I'll do that in a minute. So going back to the beginning of this section. Now, thinking back to last year, when I was watching any number of Dewey Evans interviews, I can't bear to see a second of him now, watch so much of him and listened to his voice so much. His standard sort of reply in the discussion of him being a hero and the finder of the murderer, essentially, the one that discovered it and put a stop to all these murders and found the serial killer. At that point in time, after last year's convictions, his angle, his basic statement was that he was sent 32 cases. He was sent 32 cases. I think there was one or two where he was, he says it was like, it's around 30 or over 30. So there's some kind of wiggle room. It's kind of 30, ballpark 30. And on a couple of occasions, he says specifically 32. These are interviews with like Sky, Raj Persaud, other people, the characters from the Daily Mail who did that podcast, and lots of others as well. There was, and in written interviews as well. But okay, so he was sent 32. So thus far, I've been thinking. And they didn't say anything about that at the time. They didn't say anything about these extra ones, these ones where he sent 25 more cases after Lucy Letby has been arrested. He wouldn't want to mention them back then, would he? Because if he would have said to the interviewer, but I also had suspicions about 25 more, and the interviewer would have gone, this is back last year, if he had said that, 25 more, and I thought they were suspicious as well. And the interviewer would have gone, well, did the police look into them? Well, and what does it say here? What does it say here? He notified the police that he's suspicious of them. So him being suspicious is just him being suspicious in the same way that he's suspicious as all the ones that end up on the diagram, i.e. he's suspicious that these situations, these so-called cases, meet the criteria for what he considers to be likely or definite intended harm. This is where I'm going to have to focus here, because I know there's so much in this. He thought the police should investigate. But it says here, they didn't end up being on the diagram. So to what degree were they investigated? And if they weren't investigated at all, why were they not? Was it because Lucy Letby wasn't on duty for any of them? Was that the reason? You've got so many potential angles on this, which absolutely put the police more in the frame, or Evans more in the frame of the collusion. But I think they're both involved. It's a kind of It's a vortex of collusion, back and forth, back and forth. Hypothetically, okay, let me try to work this out. So Evans ends up choosing 15 out of 32 out of that batch of 32 or 33. Call it 32, 33, because there's a range of reportage on this. He chooses 15 that he considers to be suspicious of intended harm, or that he's stating this is intended harm. Because he's not handing it over to the police and he's saying, well, I think I'm just suspicious about it, and the police finish it off and say, oh, well, you were right about that, because they self-acknowledgedly, they acknowledge themselves, I should say, the police. They don't know anything about the medicine. They're not going to be the deciding factor, are they? So if Evans says this is intended harm here, the police aren't going to have the knowledge or the wherewithal or the ability to say from a medical viewpoint, no, you're wrong about that medically, Dowie. You're wrong about that. Think again. No, these ones yes, those ones no. On what basis would the police be able to knock back these 25 cases that he says after Lucy Letby's first arrest? So in 2018, he sent another lot, 25 cases. On what basis, on what grounds would the police knock them back? I can only think of one grounds, that they, in their position, in this hideous whirlpool of corruption and collusion, can knock them back. And that's on the basis that Lucy Letby wasn't on duty. Because they know that's not going to further their so-called investigation, which is really just a targeted campaign to destroy someone. It's not going to further it. In fact, it's going to destroy it. So is that the reason they didn't investigate them further? So what's the medical reason they didn't investigate them further? But the police wouldn't have had the ability to have a medical reason to say to Dowie Evans, I know I'm going to do a lot of repetition here because I'm trying to tease this out. They wouldn't have had the medical knowledge to do that. So who else is there then? Is it the hospital themselves, the consultants themselves? Saying, oh, you sent another bunch of documents to Dowie Evans after the first arrest, 25 more. There's more to that as well. And so the police go back to the hospital and the consultants say, our expert says these look suspicious as well. So where do the police go with that information? Do they go to the consultants and say, this is what our expert thinks? And is it the consultants who say, oh no, he's right about the other ones, but he's wrong about all these, so you don't need to investigate them any further? But on what basis would they do that? Might it be on the basis that Lucy Letby's not working for those ones? And they know it's just not going to work. But this is the way, this three-corner thing, this triangle between them, I believe it's back and forth, all angles, all directions, between Evans and the consultants and Evans, Evans and police and Evans, police and consultants and Evans, all three all together, all in this hot mess of a dark, destructive, corrupt as anything, collusive process to destroy someone. Because they wanted her, so they're not going to ruin it by having any of those 25 to investigate. I mean, they just nix it straight away. They zap it. Lucy Letby's not on duty, they zap it. Let's take it another way. Let's look at it another way. Let's say, before I do that, what's the mechanism? How does it happen? Because to get these 25 cases sent to him, on what basis? Why does it happen? Where's the origin of it? What's the genesis of that to make that happen? Evans again says in many of his post-trial interviews, and other people mention it as well, that he wants all the deaths. In one interview, he said, I want all the deaths going back to all of 2015, going up to July 2016. That he gives himself away there, of course, because he doesn't want to look at the August 2016 death, because Lucy's left then. So he gives himself away, essentially. He's not looking at all the deaths. He only wants the time frame that she's working there, despite saying, oh, I didn't know her name, didn't know her name, didn't know her. He says, I knew there was somebody they were looking at, but I didn't know her name. But he knows, even if he didn't know her name, but it's rubbish, of course he knew her name. He's seeing her name thousands of times in these documents. He's seeing it as the most prevalent nurse initials stroke name in all those documents. So I've said in videos going back 9 months now, the unbelievability of the idea that he doesn't know her name. He's reading it thousands of times, hundreds of times, many hundreds of times. It's the most salient nurse name, or if it's initials, across all of the so-called cases. All the cases that he ends up deciding are intended harm. Her name is the most prevalent name in all likelihood. She's always there for them. She has to be there for them, otherwise it wouldn't reach a charge. So I lost my track a bit there. So the other way of looking at it is, why did those 25? What was the mechanism for that? So he's asked for everything, the crashes and whatever. So what are they? They're called 25 cases. Now, what is a case? Is one case an individual child that could have had multiple health crashes, or one child that sadly died and had health crashes before that? Or is a case an incident? So might those 25 quote-unquote cases include multiples for the same child, multiple incidents of sudden health deteriorations, or crashes as they call them? We don't know. It's not explicit. But I go back to the question, what was the genesis? What was the purpose for, who decided, we need to get another 25 to them? Is that the consultants raking through all the records looking for more so-called crashes that weren't necessarily deemed as crashes before? Well, they certainly do that with the insulin ones, because they weren't deemed as crashes. Otherwise, they would have been seen in this bunch of 25 and the so-called cases and or the 33 originally, but they weren't. So, is it a trawling exercise that the consultants are on? And on what basis are they doing it? What are they missing out, and what are they looking for? We don't know. These things are in shadow, and so much is in shadow, and so much is in shadow about, certainly. So what's in shadow now? A great deal more than we thought before. What's in shadow now is, you've got the original, let's say it's 33, or 32. That's what I've always gone with, because that's what you said in the interviews, Evans. You've got the 32 cases, you choose 15 out of them. 17 are in shadow in terms of what his rationale is for deciding that those are explainable and expected, as opposed to unexplainable and unexpected, and meeting the criteria that he says he relates to Rachel Aviv. Sorry, my brain's going a bit. So what's the purpose of these further 25? Who's deciding it's necessary? Where's the genesis of it coming from? Are the police saying, are there any more? Are there any more? We need more. What's that about? Because from memory, from his interviews, Evans, he's made his first reports before the end of 2017, in which he's chosen this subset of 15 from the original 33 cases, or 33. So what's the issue here? Is it some kind of, you can get the sense there's been some conflab between these three elements of police, NHS stroke consultants, and Evans saying, we need more. Well, but who, is that right? Is that what happens? We don't know, but we know something's got to happen to make that. It doesn't just happen because it's just the idea, and I know I'm not criticising Rachel Aviv in any way whatsoever. It's brilliant what she's done here, but it's just presented here as he was given another batch. Has he asked for another batch? Did the police ask for another batch? Did the consultants get together and say we need to send another batch? Based on what criteria? Nonetheless, the batch that they do send See, the second batch, we don't know how big that is. How big is that? Because we only know from this article here that from that batch, he notified there were 25 cases, so-called cases. Again, what is a case? Is it an individual child, or is it potentially multiple? Can it include multiple events for the same child? I don't know. So he's given another batch of medical records to review, it says here in the article. Well, how big was that batch from which he's chosen 25? What was his basis of exclusion of the ones he didn't choose? But it gets worse, of course, because none of those 25 are followed up. He's saying they're suspicious. Is he saying they're suspicious in a lesser way than he did about the other ones that end up being on the charge sheet, that end up being on the indictment? Is he doing that in some kind of lesser fashion so that they're easier for the... As I said before, how would the police stop it? How would the police say, well, no, I know you're saying they're suspicious, Dowie, but we don't think so. Well, they're not going to do that from the medical point of view because they don't know anything about the medical point of view. So is it the consultants that stop it, that stop that investigation? You can see how the police quite willingly are being used to... They'll just say yes to everything that can work for them. And the consultants will say yes to everything that can work for them. Here we have this Dowie character. So is it that those 25, Lucy wasn't on duty for any of them, that's why they just didn't take it any further? I don't know. We're told, but go back to last year when he's doing the post-trial interviews. He's not mentioning those 25 because it would open up a can of worms, wouldn't it? Because as I say, the interviewer would say, well, you thought they were suspicious as well, but the police didn't, you never ended up following them up. Oh God, do you think there's 25 more victims? And then he'd be put in a corner then and say, well, yeah, maybe. But the police didn't follow them up. You mean there's parents out there with the children have all been victims of crimes and the police just didn't follow them up? Do you know Dowie, this is the interview back then, retrospectively, would say to him, well, do you know why they didn't fill up? And he'd go, well, no, you'd have to ask them. Would he? Well, what would he say? What could he say? That's why he never mentioned any of it. That's why it was never mentioned. There's more here. Who's the decision maker here about what gets followed up and why and on what basis? Who's the decision maker about who stops it being further investigated? So the 15 out of the 32 original, they end up being on an indictment. These 25 just get blocked and stopped. Why? Who does it? On what basis? On what criteria? It's still the same guy saying they're suspicious. What makes a difference between these ones and the other ones? Another way of looking at it is that somehow a bunch of people, maybe the police, maybe the consultants in conjunction, somehow tell Evans, go above him and say, oh, you were right about those 15 from the original 33, but these 25, you've got all these wrong. If that happened, what would that say about the reliability of the other ones that he's chosen that end up on the indictment? If he can get it, quote unquote, wrong 25 times, if he can say 25 cases are suspicious and they end up being deemed so unsuspicious that they never end up being part of the investigation, they just get stopped, what does that say about the reliability of the 15 that he's chosen from the 32 that all end up on the indictment? So he gets it 100% with those, and then he gets 100% right there, doesn't he? Because they all end up on the indictment. So we're told, because we only got their say so that he chose 15, and we don't know what's happened or what kind of horse trading was going on between them with these so-called cases. We don't know. I think it's a hot mess, a very dark... Hot mess is too light a term. It's a dark, turgid brew of just hideousness and terrible corruption here. For all involved. NHS. I'm calling it the NHS now because Gilby's on board. If it's the consultant spearheaded it. But then now Gilby's on board. So it's the whole trust against Lucy, police against Lucy, Evans against Lucy, all knowing what they're doing, all targeting her. Gilby, back in 2018, don't you know what she's done? Hasn't been charged yet. Don't you know what she's done? In the lunch queue, allegedly, Jayaram saying, things about, deliberate harm, a murder on the ward. Evans saying, deliberate harm. They're all after her. But this is a guy, Evans, that can get 100% strike rate, ending in all these apparently legitimate convictions, all those ones he chose originally, and yet can get it 100% wrong with the next batch. Are we meant to believe that? On what basis could we believe that? On what basis could we believe he gets it 100% wrong in this second batch that are never investigated, never taken any further, and yet got it 100% right in the original batch? This is what I mean by unpacking this text here. It's the ramifications of this. I know Rachel Aviv says, oh yes, it might have changed. It might have changed the, what does she call it here? Yeah, the row of X's under Lucy's name. Yes, that may be a case, but that's not the only argument. In fact, that's the smaller part of the ramifications of this, of understanding what's happened here, is that Evans has either got it wrong 25 times where he's saying suspicious things have happened, and yet we're meant to take his word for it. He gets 100% strike rate, absolutely perfect before, or what? I don't know. It you can't grasp it. It doesn't make any sense. It just shows that this is all. So either he's got them all wrong, or they do match the similar criteria as the other ones, and this is it. Yeah, this is where I was going to. The police, specifically the police, send a note back to, or ring up Evans, or email him, or whatever it is, and saying, we're okay with what we've got. Don't worry about these ones. They don't even have to tell him that Lucy's not on duty for them. So it has to be one or the other, The police tell him, well, we're not going to take these ones any further. I know you said they're suspicious, but we can't work with them, Dowie. Thanks for your efforts. We can't work with them. It doesn't occur to, well, it does occur to the police to say, well, hold on a minute. He's saying there are suspicious things happening here when she's not on duty. We can't have any of that. They've got to shut him down in a way, haven't they? But then he doesn't bother. He's not bothered by that. Why isn't he bothered by it? Why isn't Evans bothered by the fact that he's found 25 suspicious events that never go anywhere? They did it for all these other ones. The trouble with this is there would have been a huge amount of interaction and collusion between all these three elements that end up being this. And this is why, because of that collusion, because of that disgusting cesspit of collusion and corruption between the police, NHS and Evans, in the construction of this framing, this stitch-up job, things like this become very salient, and you begin to think, well, that doesn't make any sense then. It doesn't make any sense that 25 cases that he's deemed suspicious just get blocked. I'm going to have a look now for the, just going to read it through, the bit from the appeal document. I'll just have to pause it a minute. I'm back. Okay, I've got the appeal document here, which is the reasons given for turning down the appeal, as specious as they all are. There's point 22 here. Point 22, and it reads as follows. During the police investigation which followed, Dr. Evans, a retired consultant paediatrician, was instructed to review clinical records of the babies in the unit who had died or collapsed suddenly. Initially, he reviewed 33 sets of clinical records, where an infant had died or deteriorated and where the event was expected and or unexplained. Sorry, I'll read that again. Where the event was unexpected, so he's 33 sets of clinical records where the infant had died or deteriorated and where the event was unexpected and or unexplained. He was later sent, so we know later now is post Lucy Letby's first arrest, so in 2018, the following year basically, the next year, about a year later, from the original lot he got of the 33. He was later sent a further 28 sets of records for review. That suggests they're individual patients, doesn't it? As opposed to events, multiple events for one patient, or a mixture of multiple events for one patient and then single events for other single patients. The purpose of the review, so that's not that clear. Which review are they talking about? The original one? They're not being specific about whether they're talking about the 30. Anyway, I'll just read it. The purpose of the review was to consider in each case the cause of the collapse of the baby. He produced a very large number of reports. I bet he did, yeah. It's on about 450 quid an hour doing that. We found the charges for it, the costs, the costings, 450 quid an hour when he's making up his reports. So he's earned a good few bob out of it, yeah, destroying someone. He produced a very large number of reports, including a general statement dated 17th of April 2019, setting out his background and experience and a glossary of terms. God. A review of published literature regarding air embolus in newborn infants. That should be air embolism, they've made a mistake in that. The Court of Appeal. In newborn infants dated 3rd of July 2019. And a series of reports, nice little learner for Evans, considering the events surrounding the deaths or collapses of babies who were on the subject of charges. So he's done no reports, obviously, about all the ones where he's suspicious of things and the police, or someone, but it's got to be the police, isn't it? Who else is it going to be? It's them that have stopped the progress of that. For reasons of what? We don't know. There's more here, there's a lot more in this, I'm sure. There's more ways to think about it, but I hope you can see that there's something, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse in terms of the logic of it. I don't have to be a mathematician, statistician, a doctor or a scientist, and nor do you, to know that it's falling apart. The logic of it is all falling apart. And that's what will tend to happen. When people are lying, when there's collusion, when there's corruption, it can't pass the smell test. It can't pass the logic test. How is this guy, I don't want to call him a guy, how is this creature got it wrong 25 times after getting it right every time before? Or is he just, it just throws your mind, because if he's chosen a lot of other cases where Lucy Letby isn't on duty, that suggests he's just a complete scattergun machine. And then it suggests more that it's the police that crop his range of suggestions into only ones where Lucy's on duty. So they reduce down the data, avoiding all the data that's unhelpful. Including Evans saying, oh, here's a suspicious event, but Lucy isn't on duty. Police go, well, no, we can't use it then. Not even caring about what that means in terms of the reliability of their so-called expert. They don't care. They don't care that he's literally proving himself to be either useless. I don't know. I just don't know, because we don't know exactly how they work this out, how they finessed this. We don't know how they finessed the con. And it is a con. It's an absolute con. The con is what they produce at the end with all the X's. That's a complete fraudulent piece of information for all sorts of reasons that people have gone over many times. But for this in particular, not only, as Rachel Aviv is intimating here, that the chart may look different if you have some of those 25 there and the 2 that the defence found have similar criteria. Well, that's another question. If the defence found that there were similar criteria in 2 that they found, for which Evans chooses and determines that it meets his criteria for intended harm, but the defence find 2 others that weren't on the charge sheet, but Lucy's not on duty. What are the defence doing about those other 25? What questions did they ask in the trial? What questions did they ask? What discovery did they get from the police in terms of why they weren't followed up? Did they try to follow that up? What were those cases? What happened to them? Why was Evans either wrong or just deemed not to be helpful in those ones? What does that mean for Evans? What does it say about him? What does it say about the police? That they can the police unilaterally decide to overrule Evans on his medical opinion when they're taking his medical opinion as gospel for all the ones that work for them, for the case? You can see how dark this is. I really hope you can see how dark it is. And it's way worse than I thought. It's way worse than I thought. It gets worse and worse. And it will be, what we don't know is the known unknowns are even worse. And there's going to be some unknown unknowns. You know, is it Rumsfeld did all that stuff? But there will be known unknowns. We know there's a very dark heart in this, and it's just about how we begin to uncover it. Could it ever really be fully uncovered? Well, we're dealing with pathological liars here in the police, who will stop at nothing to get Lucy Letby, and eschew and push away all evidence that might seem exculpatory of her. If they were honest brokers, the police, and Evans comes up with all these cases of suspicious cases, and they think, hold on, and Lucy Letby's not working, they'd go, hold on a minute, can we rely on this guy? We're charging a person with multiple murders here. He's telling us that there are similar instances going on when she's not on duty. Please don't tell us there's a second serial killer at work. Of course they're not. They don't do that because they're acting in a corrupt fashion. They're acting in a fashion simply with a desire to win at all costs, and to win to them is to destroy the person and get the person in the frame at any cost, at all costs and at any cost. There's no honour, there's no truth, there's no justice, there's no care, there's no fairness. Anything that doesn't work for them, they just push to the side, even though that should give them doubts about the whole escapade they're involved in. But it won't give them doubts because they're loving what they're doing. They're loving what they're doing, the police. And Evans is being paid, so he's not going to start going to the police. Hold on a minute, police, why aren't you investigating these? I can't in all good... Evans is not going to go and query his pitch on 450 quid an hour and say to them, hold on a minute, you've taken all my other ones. How come you've just knocked back all these 25? I just told you they're suspicious. I can't go on like this in all good faith. You're allowing all these other crimes to have, Lucy Letby to have got away with it. Or whoever, he pretends he doesn't know her name, but he would know after 2018 because she's been arrested. But he knew all the time. Let's get real. He knew all the time. Everyone's known all the time who they're going after. All the time, since the beginning. Everyone involved in this stitch-up has known who they're going after from the beginning. There's no mysteries here. If Evans if he's just a nutter that's just getting it wrong all the time in a scattergun way, or if he's someone that he believes he's right, well, why didn't he go to the police? Well, you've got to follow these up. Why have you dropped them? Well, he won't, will he? Because they're paying him, or it's coming through their auspices, you know. Police pay him initially, and I think up to the charge, then afterwards it's the CPS. Either way, but they're his kind of boss, if you see what I mean, or his employer. He's not going to say, well, look, I know you're my employer, but you're just doing this completely wrong. You just knocked back all my suspicions here. Well, my work was good enough for you before, when I did the 15 out of the 33. You're going for all those, but what about these ones? Aren't these worth it? Aren't these cases where I'm suspicious of harm? In these 25 cases, aren't those babies? Are they lesser than the babies that I thought there was intended harm with the other ones? Why are you making this differential, police? But there's a conversation being had. You know, I don't know. Is it because all of them Lucy Letby's not on duty? And if that's the case, then the police have got to go, well, this guy's an idiot. But they don't want to do that either, because I'm repeating myself now. I think I've got it across. I hope so. I might have to return to this because as more things, think about more things. But you can see what it is now. Can you not? Old Rolf Harris, can you see what it is yet? Can you see what it is yet? Maybe he wasn't the best person to choose, but you know what I mean. Can you see what it is yet? And see the architecture of the framing here, can't we? By what is left out, by what is not done, by what is not said. And as they say, the truth will out. And I just hope it does. I mean, it's got to. If there's a God, it must do. And he sees all this. Or they see, she sees all this, God does. And knows the truth. And it's got to be put right. And there might be more to that. I might come back to that another time. That section, the next section start talking about insulin cases, and that's a whole world in and of itself. But yeah, so thanks for listening. Take care. All the best. Bye-bye.